Not too loud. Okay, so we had these classes on Friday mornings, changed to Tuesday nights, and now we're changed back to Friday mornings, which welcome. It seems to suit quite a few of us. So just as we start off on this mind training exploration, it's a particular genre, and we'll go through some of that historical bits before we actually get to the text. For myself, I think, well, as far as I can recall, I first heard the teachings from on the 8 verses of thought transformation by Geshe Langui Tangpa, I think. Anyway, a little bit louder. Okay. Yeah, I need to be a bit louder, do I? Or maybe where the mic is. Yeah. Okay. How's that? No, made no difference. Yeah. Okay. How's that, Lynn? Good. Yeah. So I first had heard the teachings, His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Washington State. Of course, I wasn't there. I heard it on the recording. And in the middle of the 2000s, I think. And I'd listen over and over and over and over and over in the car on the way to work and so forth. So I think for about 18 months. I hope something went in. But since then, so we're focusing on the 7-point mind training in Geshe Chökyi. And I remember it's a very vast teaching. So when a short text, but vast teaching. So when I was at Vajrayana Institute and I asked one of the teachers to teach on this and gave him 6 months, I think he took 1.5 years and he hadn't finished. So it can be very extensive, obviously, when going into that much depth, but at least to get us a taste. Okay, so as I mentioned, giving this overview is setting the historical context of these teachings. And yeah, well, we're already there. The mind training practices challenge us to reorient the framework through which we view the world. So maybe encountering the Dharma has done that already in terms of, it's like we turn our view around 180 degrees. And the turning of the view around is this releasing from the self-centered attitude and focusing instead on cherishing others more than self. So actually many years ago, I went to this workshop in the 80s. It was in New South Wales, in Gerringong, if anyone knows where that is, little place. But the speaker, the workshop leader, Jean Houston, she's a Episcopalian, philosopher, educator. And I had read some of her works and I was very interested in her. She was part of there was a think tank with the Dalai Lama some years ago where they brought together 40 leaders of different areas of the arts and sciences and philosophy and education and so forth as this think tank for a week, and then presenting what His Holiness was interested in. So it was to present to the Dalai Lama of what's the future in your fields, what do you see as the future directions. So this was documented in 2 films, Dalai Lama Renaissance. And so she was one of those presenters those years later. But what I remember, a few things stuck with me from that time, but one of them was, the trouble is people go around thinking, oh, I'm no good and the world, sucks and, it's terrible. And they've got their head down, feeling depressed. And so look up, look out, and engage with others. So this is what this is saying to do. That completely transforms your emotional state, just by our connection with others. So in this Lojong training, it's taking that further than not just looking out, but actually wanting to benefit others, cherish others more than oneself. It doesn't exclude oneself, because it's saying there's one of me, and if we include all the insects, all the ants and so forth, gazillions of other beings, but just on the human level, what is it now, 8 billion or so in the world. So that, okay, we're not going to necessarily engage with all of those, but that think, how can what I do be of benefit, not just to myself, but also to others? And that's our motivation as Mahayana practitioners anyway, to benefit as many beings as we can. So dedicating our lives to benefiting others temporarily in samsara, in other words, whatever we can do right now in our life situation, and ultimately showing the way to full awakening. So right now, again, ultimately, those who are interested in the Dharma, how do we make that Dharma accessible? We've provided a venue here, we have teachings and so forth. So this is tapping into the ultimate as well. Of course, ultimate again, when we become a Buddha, well, we won't have to be told what to do, we'll know it all. So it's we might think that's a very long way away, but who knows? So whatever we can do right now to open the door of the Dharma in whatever skillful way, not even mentioning Buddhism or the Dharma. I had a friend in the US, so I did a lot of work in prisons, and I went to spend a weekend with her because she had developed this training program. She was a probation officer and Buddhist. And she knew that if she mentioned Buddha, anything Buddhist, she would lose her job. So she developed this training program, explained to me how it was based on the Four Noble Truths and this and that, without mentioning any of those words. Very, very skillful. She called it, what do I do with Larry? Because she just met this guy and says, I don't know what to do with this guy. And so that led her to develop this wonderful training program with no mention of the Dharma, but very much embedded in the Dharma teachings. So you never know what our skill even right now. So this quote, and there's a series of quotes from His Holiness the Dalai Lama here. So it's part of this series with Thubten Chökyi, and this is In Praise of Great Compassion, is the 5th volume. So these volumes have been going through the different, the lower scope, medium scope. So here we are at the great scope in the Lamrim, the Mahayana motivation, In Praise of Great Compassion. So this 5th volume was released in December last year. So that's the latest one. I'm not sure if they're going on after number 5, or if that's it. But they're wonderful compilations of the teachings. Okay. Next. The practice of mind training helps us remain balanced when we experience either happiness or suffering, without becoming giddy and overly optimistic when we're happy, or discouraged and depressed when we face suffering. So it's having this mind, the practice of mind training, of coming to a mind of mental quiescence. So this is when we train in shamatha karma abiding. This is what we're aiming towards. But then it is, when we're faced with difficulties and problems, that we can maintain that same even-mindedness, that same sort of mental capacity to be able to deal with situations without being tossed around by them here and there. So whatever we encounter in life, wealth or poverty, success or failure, a multitude of friends or loneliness, we are steadfast in our pursuit of full awakening. So this is about not being caught up with worldly concerns. But then when you think about something like loneliness, it's very much endemic, particularly in the aging populations. But also we saw the impact of mental health. We'll see more and more as a result of COVID, for example, and people feeling socially isolated. Because maybe not in Western Australia. I rarely was there? There was a period or two, wasn't there? Well, I was restricted only because I came from Queensland, and they were about, when I arrived off the plane, they said, "Oh, don't worry, but tomorrow the Premier is going to make an announcement and you won't have to quarantine." And then they found 2 cases in Queensland, 2, and sort of in the context now that's a blip. But at the time, people weren't vaccinated. So 2. And so we were in lockdown next door. But it wasn't very long. And it certainly wasn't like in Victoria and places where my friends were saying, "We have now been locked up for 300 or locked down for 360 days or something, So that impact of loneliness is very real at the moment in our world. So if we can, of course, I was in Queensland. We did have a period, about 6 months of restriction, but I was at Chenrezig Nuns community, so we just went great. Now we're being a real monastic community. And students came to the, I don't know if you've been to Chenrezig Institute, but it's a big property, so they would come down to the Lion Gate, which was the entrance, and they'd open their boot and we'd open ours and transfer. They would bring us veggies and so forth, and just like a proper monastery. This is great. Yeah, it was a bit weird when actually we started opening up and this is like, oh, there's other people here. But I have to say, we were locked down with 40 others. Like, we were a big family on the property. So, yeah, we had, I guess, some, means because of thinking, okay, this is a retreat, to be able to deal with that. And it wasn't a sense of loneliness at all. However, try that when you're, really on your own and you don't want to be. Okay, so this is, being steadfast in our pursuit of full awakening, of developing this mind of bodhicitta, of, on top of compassion and affection for others, great compassion, and then extending that more and more out to more and more beings, so that, like a Buddha, equal regard for all beings. This is the mind we're training in, a very powerful mind. Okay, so these quotes here are from Mind Training, the Great Collection. So this gathers together a lot of the teachings, historical teachings on mind training, including on their 8 verses and 7-point mind training, which is one we're looking at. And Geshe Zopa, who we've just hosted recently, still joyful, over a couple of years for FBMT Australia gave commentary on this text. So it's a thick text. I think maybe some people here tuned into Geshe-le's teachings, but they're still available online, going through that whole compendium of this great collection. Okay. So within the vast body of Tibetan spiritual literature, one genre stands out for its inspirational power, universality, and down-to-earth practicality. That's what we want, something accessible that we can put into practice. Qualities that have made these teachings dear to Tibetan people for generations. And if you see, it's changing now with the younger generations of Tibetans, because they've been cut off from these teachings, they've been displaced and so forth. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But in generally, we remark that Tibetan people, coming from Tibet or having been in prison because they're Tibetan simply, and then coming to places like Australia and having initially, having poverty in terms of external wealth and so forth and difficult conditions, but internally incredibly strong, incredibly resilient. And there's sort of profound resilience as a result of these. It's like growing up with this, even you don't go to study and so forth, that growing up with these states of mind, very powerful. So here Thubten Jinpa says, I'm referring to a collection of texts and their associated contemplative practices. So this is in general, the main contemplative practices we do in relation to developing bodhicitta are the 7-point cause and effect coming from Arya Asanga, who received those teachings directly from Buddha Maitreya, and then the equalizing and exchanging self with others, the other main one coming from, well, at least being transmitted comprehensively in the Bodhisattva's way of life by Shantideva in the 8th century, and then Lama Tsongkhapa combining the two, call that 11 points. In the Lam Rim outlines, for example, which is a basic text for the November course at Kopan, we can say again, because it's back on again this year after a few years hiatus. Then in that, it conjoins, it shows you how to conjoin these practices. So a very extensive series of meditations. So this combined with the actual texts, such as a 7-point mind training, is part of this Lojong or mind training, which first appeared in Tibet about 1,000 years ago. At its heart, the Tibetan mind training teachings represent a profound celebration of the spiritual ideal of genuine altruism. So no strings attached, this sort of genuine wish to be of benefit to others. So it's very difficult whilst we're in samsara to have that 100%. You know, one of my teachers says there's no such things as unconditional love because we're in samsara. I don't know. We can debate that because I think we can get pretty close to unconditional, but that's the idea. So a deeply felt compassion. So deeply felt in that it's a result of over again and again and again meditating on, you know, using these techniques, meditating on compassion until it is something spontaneous, that it just arises, you know, that we see somebody suffering and our heart goes out to them. You know, watching the news can be a very good thing for that practice, because the news generally has all the, you know, there's a few good stories, but generally the bad events that have happened. And at first I was really distressed by that, why there wasn't the good news. And I think, well, if it's newsworthy, generally it's because we expect things to go well. And when accidents happen, when earthquakes happen, all sorts of things, it is newsworthy because it's something that doesn't happen all the time. Anyway, I train my mind like that, but having compassion for what is, and thinking what it would be like for all those people caught up in the earthquake, in the flood, in the war, and so forth. The actual experience of that. And so that's, you know, we cultivate just with our thinking. So we have different levels of compassion. You know, Charles Darwin said, we're hardwired for compassion. We can't help but help. However, you know, sometimes that is, okay, I have compassion for my family, my friends, my circle. I have compassion for humans, but not for mosquitoes. Dalai Lama talks about that. Says mosquitoes, you know, not sure. Anyway, compassion for mosquitoes. So we have compassion for our species, but then, you know, we see, particularly amongst different mammal species, you know, that cats or dogs or lions, you know, looking after other species. You know, we see all those cute, I haven't seen for a while, the cute little videos of, you know, sort of lions looking after I'm not sure. I haven't seen for a while. I've seen lions looking after kittens, I think. You could say they're the same species, just bigger. Or we have, you know, very much have crisis compassion when these, thing like the war and everyone wants to go and help and be a volunteer and so forth, or send money if they can, or like the Chökyi earthquake, etc. These times, or when we had the bushfires here, and so many people from internationally, sort of just wanted to help and send money and sent their helicopters and so forth. So, but that doesn't last. It's either too limited because it's not broad enough, encompassing. Well, what about those who I even don't like? How do I, having compassion for them is the challenge, or for snakes, things you might have an aversion to. So this is what we're wanting to cultivate, is that very powerful mind for all beings and a dedication to serve their welfare. So whether we do that through the work that we engage with. We were talking last night with the Pure Land group was meeting here last night, and that work in that space of palliative care. Today down in Bunbury, Bunbury has a mission to create compassionate communities. So that's a focus of theirs, and particularly in relation to palliative care. And so they're having visits to the cemetery, talking about the lives of those who are there. They're having a lantern ceremony, I think tomorrow night, is it? Of it's like they do for the Day of the Dead, and have recognition of those who passed, and they're having various talks and so forth. So to bring that awareness into the community, and compassion for those who, particularly who might be hidden. We've had all that thing with the aged care facilities where they've had the Royal Commission into that, and the treatment of people in aged care, and now looking at improving that. So those sorts of endeavours, or whatever endeavours we're involved in, doctors, nurses, being in the service industry generally, that it's easy then, my job is to benefit others. So that fulfills that dedication to serve others. So this is an ideal shared across many of the world's great spiritual and humanistic traditions. So we can see that all religions, have this as a basis, but just generally in society, compassion is not something unknown, is it, in society? So hence all these services that we have to benefit others. It was something very heartwarming I felt when COVID first started grabbing hold in Australia, that instead of saying, oh, what's the impact of the economy, it was looking after people's health and welfare first. So it sort of goes, well, we expect things to be like that, but that comes out of we have to care for each other. And the economy took a back seat, and people got not job seeker, the other one. Yeah, got the payments. Yeah, organisations and so forth to be able to keep going. Okay. So by the 12th century, Lojong, mind training, had become the most cherished spiritual heritage on the vast Tibetan plateau, with attendant myths and legends associated with its origin and development. So, a lot of stories grow up about it, but getting to the basis of the lineage, we'll look at that. So this word Lojong, Lo literally means mind, and Jong means training. So that's literally a translation. But if we look in more detail, so when we say mind, awareness, consciousness, our thoughts, our attitude, whatever mental factors that we have is all encompassed under that word. So it's not just one primary mental consciousness, it's all the attendant mental factors that come along, our virtues, our virtual states of mind, our afflicted states of mind, our thoughts, our attitudes, our views, our philosophical views. So it's sort of encompassing all of that. And then the Zhong, the training. So when I was in the US some years ago, Vajrapani Center had, they designed a hoodie jacket and had mind training. So it looked like, you know, it just in the letters you'd have for the gym training. It's great, mind training. I'm going to mind training school. So different ways we can translate Zhong or understand it. Training, whereby one acquires a skill or masters a field of knowledge. Habituation or familiarization with specific ways of being and thinking. And this is what we're really focusing on. Familiarizing ourselves and habituating ourselves to acting from that heart of compassion. And to do that, cultivating the specific mental qualities, such as universal compassion, doing that through our meditation practices. And also then putting that into practice. You know, like my simplest motivation in the morning is, may everything I think, do and say today be of benefit to others. And then I can interrogate myself at the end of the day and saying, how much of that was of benefit to others? But at least I'm setting that motivation, and that's putting my mind in that space. You know, may. As long as Opa Rinpoche makes it a little bit easier with taking the Buddha's teachings and applying that, you know, the book, the Bodhisattva Attitude, where it's like when you're taking a shower and you're cleansing, purifying the mind, internal shower at the same time, for the welfare of all sentient beings, turning on the light to illuminate the darkness for all sentient beings. So anything you're just naturally doing in the day, thinking that's for the benefit of others, of course it's for our benefit. But if we think about it, we can make it for the benefit of others. And then it becomes more powerful, and we're training our mind. And then cultivate, cleansing or purifying, as I said, the mind of one's own delusions, because the root one of grasping at a self and then cherishing on top of that, cherishing that self is the one that gets in the way, that closes our heart to others. So we need to do a lot of purification of that daily, on a daily basis. Okay. So all these different meanings carry this salient idea of transformation. The most important idea is that we're transforming the mind. And here again, we can say, well, aren't all the Buddha's teachings about transforming the mind? Yes, but this genre specifically focuses on that through a process of training, habituation, cultivation, cleansing, as we've just said. Now, Thubten Jinpa uses some big words. Induces a kind of metanoesis. So, okay, put simply, this is a transformation of the mind that comes through spiritual or philosophical training. Okay, so basically it's saying you transform the mind from the ordinary deluded state, whose modus operandi is self-centeredness, to a fundamentally changed perspective of an enlightened other-centeredness. So I have a qualm with the word enlightened, because for those of us who are not enlightened, we can still have other-centeredness. We can still be focusing outwards on others, which is what this training is about. Broadly speaking, all the teachings of the Buddha can be characterized as mind training. However, the genre called mind training, or Lojong, refers to these specific approaches for cultivating the mind, our altruistic aspiration to seek full awakening for the benefit of all beings, full awakening being Buddhahood, full enlightenment. The spontaneous mind of bodhicitta is being a foundation for that. We talk about uncontrived bodhicitta is when it spontaneously arises, and that's where we enter the Mahayana path. However, in the meantime, what we call contrived, the non-spontaneous, this is the training. Especially through the practice of equalizing and exchanging self with others, as I mentioned in Shantideva's Bodhisattva's way of life. Okay. And then traditional Tibetan sources identify Indian Bengali Lama Atisha to be the source of Lojong in Tibet. So Lama Atisha went to Tibet after he had gone to Indonesia to gain the teachings on bodhicitta from Lama Salingpa. So Lama Salingpa, who was in Sumatra, this is referred to here next. It is said that Lama Salingpa received the transmission directly from the Buddha Maitreya. And there's a lot of, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and other High Lamas are very interested to find precisely where that happened, whether it happened where Lama Salingpa lived in Sumatra, or whether it actually happened in Mendut near Borobudur, because there's a big Maitreya statue there, and it's believed that there is where the transmission was, but there's a lot of research going on into that. And so nonetheless, so Salingpa was a Siddhvanavipa king. That's his lineage. And since the 7th century, they had sponsored a monastery at Nalanda in Bihar state, at Nalanda Monastery. And so they had monks training there. Also where they were in, I visited the area, Jambi in Sumatra, where it was, and there are the ruins of 70 temples that are all connected via canals and so forth. So a couple of those are being excavated, and this was so it seemed they had a big monastic community there as well. And Lama Atisha went there and stayed 12 years and received that whole comprehensive set of teachings, ornament of clear realization and so forth, coming from Buddha Maitreya to Salingpa to Lama Atisha, and then he went to Tibet. So, yes, as it says, judging by currently available literature, the early origins of mind training as a separate genre of text and spiritual practice appear to lie in varied pithy instructions Atisha may have given individually to many of his disciples. So when we come to the 7-point mind training, there's a lot of pithy, they're called slogans, which are things to learn and think what they mean. We'll go through those to see, how do I practice these in my life, the practical application. And then later, this was compiled under the rubric of the root lines of mind training, forming the basis of the emergence of subsequent Lojong literature. So this is summarized in the next, just showing the lineage. So we're showing the lineage, next slide, to show it is, next slide, to show it is authentic tradition. So the Kadampa mind training, so Lama Atisha established the Kadampa tradition, so after he was requested to go to Tibet, and of course, he was the abbot of Vikramashila monastery where he was, didn't want to let him go, and then, without going into the very long story, actually when I was just on pilgrimage in the dark Spiti and so forth, went to a couple of the monasteries, so Tabo Monastery in particular in Spiti, where Rinchen Sangpo, who was the translator who was one of the expeditions to go down and get Lama Atisha. So he established these monasteries in that area that are still in operation today. It's nice to, I find it very nice to join all the dots of all these people and that they actually went through that area and so forth. So out of all his many, many teachers, Lama Atisha held Silingpa as his, sort of heart guru in terms of receiving all the bodhicitta teachings, bodhicitta training, and that being shown how to cultivate that, how to develop that mind of awakening in your own mind. So he was able to do that. And then when he went to Tibet, his chief student was Dron Tompa. And it was predicted that part of, it was predicted by Tara, actually, when Atisha was requesting Tara to give him guidance about whether to go to Tibet. And of course, Tara says it'll be a benefit to a great many people, it'll be a great benefit, but your life will be shortened by 20 years. However, you will meet this heart disciple there. And so Dron Tompa was the one who then, when they met, apparently Lama Atisha was off having lunch with some benefactors, and Dron Tompa had heard that he was in Tibet. This was very early on, and he went to make offerings to Lama Atisha. He hadn't met him yet, and he wasn't home, so to speak. And so then he thought, oh, well, I'll go to where they're having lunch. So they met on the path and recognized each other, and then the rest is history. So he became the closest disciple out of Lama Atisha's 3 close disciples, and became a master in that Kadam tradition. So we have that Kadampa tradition really established by Lama Atisha, and then going down through all these Geshis, and then coming to Lama Tsongkhapa, establishing Gelugpa out of that tradition. Okay, that's a bit of history. And Dron Tompa had 3 main disciples himself, the 3 noble brothers. So Geshe Chengawa. So we talk about the mind training lineage, these 3 different Kadam lineages, and in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, Pabonko Rinpoche has at the back. It shows all the lineages down from Shakyamuni Buddha to the present. And so you see these 3 lineages there. Geshe Chengawa, who was the patriarchal, we say, founder of the Kadampa lineage of pith instruction, and Geshe Punchungwa, the founder of the lineage of oral transmission, and Geshe Potawa. So this is the one we mainly refer to because he was the founder of the treatise lineage. So then all the teachings that we have coming down from him, Bonko Rinpoche calls this the classical lineage. So then I was fortunate in 2007, maybe at Root Institute, I think so, 2007, 2008, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was giving teachings on the Kadampa masters. So we have from that we have a book, one of the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives, one of the 3 books also available online, from those teachings on the Kadam masters by Rinpoche. And so then Geshe Potawa, his main disciples, Geshe Sharawa, who was the guru of Geshe Chökyi. Don't worry if you've lost the by now of who's who. So Geshe Chökyi, who composed the 7-point mind training, and Geshe Langri Tangpa, who composed the 8 verses of thought transformation, which was the first of the Lojong texts to be called a Lojong text to establish that genre. So Geshe Chökyi wanted to meet Geshe Langri Tangpa because he found this verse and found out that it was composed by Geshe Langri Tangpa, but he'd already passed away. And so then Geshe Sharawa, who was a student of Geshe Langri Tangpa, then became his teacher. So that verse is from the next one after that, next one after that. Oh, no, that one. We're trying out the slides. So Geshe Chökyi composed the 7-point mind training, which is the one we're going to be looking at shortly. So he found just this one verse, and this is it, from the 8 verses of thought transformation. When out of envy others mistreat me with abuse, insults, or the like, I shall accept defeat and offer the victory to others. So you can see the Lojong texts were mainly passed on in secret, because you read that and you go, whoa, that's pretty confronting. I don't know about that. That's pretty intense. But he only found this one verse. And so he wanted to know who composed it. He found that out. And then, as I said, Geshe Langri Tangpa had already passed. So, these great beings, such as Geshe Chökyi, are able to find a snippet of text and know where it belongs in the context of all the Buddha's teachings, and then know where it belongs in this case in terms of Mahayana. You've got to think this was early days of Lojong transmissions when they were passed on in secret, and so you didn't have public access to these teachings like we have today. So it's quite incredibly precious, and that he could see that the great significance of this, and it was moved to be able to receive the teachings himself. So on the basis of that, of finding that text, he composed the 7-point mind training, which is the text that you have. Any questions, comments so far? That's the history bit over for now. Just to give context. So in the 7-point mind training, first looking at the structure of it. So we have the homage. So generally every text will have a homage. For example, in the great treatise on the path to enlightenment, Lama Tsongkhapa's Lam Rim comprehensive commentary, he praises Lama Atisha for composing the lamp of the path to enlightenment, and says actually Lama Atisha is the composer of this text because it's all coming from Lama Atisha. So that's a homage to Lama Atisha, showing the lineage of where those teachings came from. So here we have a homage, and then the preliminary verse, so explaining the preliminaries, what as a basis for the practice, what you need to do first. And then the actual practice is training in the awakening mind, the mind of bodhicitta. And there's 2 parts: how to train in the ultimate awakening mind and how to train in the conventional awakening mind. So the ultimate awakening mind, the uncontrived bodhicitta, combined with wisdom realizing emptiness. So that's the most profound mind. And the conventional awakening mind really refers to what we've been talking about, how we can cultivate that mind in and take that into our actions. So training like that. Okay. So in your text, you'll see the homage to great compassion. The essence of this nectar of secret instruction is transmitted from the master from Sumatra. So the homage here is actually to great compassion. So it's saying the genre, the homage to this genre of teaching, the essence of this nectar of secret instruction transmitted by Lama Salingpa, the master from Sumatra. So it's, again, it's showing the lineage of where this teaching has come from. And then in the preliminary verse, going on your text, revealing the features of the doctrine to engender respect for the instruction. So the first one is to engender respect for the Lama, the Guru, the lineage of these instructions, and then for the actual instructions. So just looking at the first two lines, you should understand the significance of this instruction as like a diamond, the sun, and a medicinal tree. So as like a diamond. Nankapel in the mind training, like the rays of the sun, that book takes you through the 7-point mind training. So quite a bit of the commentary comes from him, as like a diamond. So he says there's no need to mention the extent to which a diamond is able to satisfy desire and dispel poverty, for even a fragment of one surpasses all other jewels, retaining the name diamond and averting impoverishment. So using the analogy of diamond as something most precious in this world, but it's using all these analogies to say how precious this teaching is. Similarly, knowing even a small part of this teaching on mind training, like a fragment of a diamond, which is what Geshe Chakwa found, a fragment, which leads one to the activation of the awakening mind, the mind of bodhicitta, means that one retains the name of awakening warrior, a bodhisattva. So a bodhisattva is often referred to as a courageous warrior, because it takes a lot of courage to go against the grain, to be out of sync with society, especially we see like in times like now when there's a lot more, shall we say, focus on the self, looking after number one and so forth, that it takes a lot of courage to be out of step, which is what a bodhisattva needs to do more and more, while at the same time excelling the crowned masters of both the hearers and solitary realizers. So it's saying it's a much more powerful mind than that of Arya hearers and solitary realizers, who do have a direct perceptual realization of emptiness. However, it's not saying they don't have compassion, but it's not the focus of the training of the hearers and solitary realizers. We would say today of Theravadan practitioners, bucket loads of compassion, no doubt, but the focus of the training is on self-liberation, so therefore on uprooting the ignorant mind of delusion, and having that, being in sync with reality, having that direct perceptual understanding of reality. Okay. As well as completely dispelling the poverty of cyclic existence. So it's using the analogy of a diamond's worth a lot. So if you had one, you'd be very wealthy, or depends. I once was given to, I used to, before I ordained, I had pierced ears. I've still got the evidence to show. And I got given one little earring with a teeny tiny sliver of diamond. I don't know where it's gone. I don't know if it could have been worth very much. It was teeny tiny. But anyway, it's saying that sliver of diamond in terms of the teachings is much more valuable than that. Lamas Rinpoche would say much more valuable than a sky filled with wish-fulfilling jewels. So skies of diamonds. So that's the idea of an analogy, completely dispelling the poverty of cyclic existence. In other words, we want to uproot samsara, our own deluded states of mind. Then these teachings will do that. Okay. And furthermore, as like a diamond, this being so, what need is there to mention what a full comprehension of the whole teaching, the whole diamond, on mind training would mean in terms of its qualities and value, if you get the whole teaching. Like, it's beyond imagining the measure, the wealth of that. And then as like the sun, so we know the analogy that when the sun rises in the morning and the darkness is dispelled, there's no place or time when darkness directly covers the sun. I was thinking of the eclipse and going, well, there are eclipses, but it's never entirely dark in an eclipse, is it? Like, the sky doesn't go black, does it? Does it? No. There's still light. It can't entirely. No. Which is a good thing. Lama Yeshe gave you advice that actually not to go out. That's not to observe eclipses, not because it's it's a disturbing energy. You just have to watch the animals go crazy, right? There's a disturbing energy there. And I was at one of the Lamp of the Path retreats with Lama Zopa Rinpoche in the US when there was a solar eclipse. Everyone at the retreat had their, safety glasses. They were handing them out, I think. And then Lama Zopa came in and said, okay, he repeated what Lama Yeshe had said, and then he said, so stay inside the Gompa and do practice. So at the time that came, there were 12 of us in the Gompa. The other 200 or so were outside. Very hard to follow the Guru's instruction, isn't it? Yeah, and 8 of those were the filming team, so they had to be there to do all their filming business. Very difficult. Yeah. And it was just like, isn't that a simple advice? Yes, but not easy to follow. Because I've been looking forward to this eclipse for how long? Okay. Yes.
So in that context, disturbed energy.
Yeah.
Going back to so the bodhisattvas, to me,
yeah,
they're out there in that disturbed energy.
But not disturbed by it.
No, but they're mixing with the parts. Yeah, the interrupting disturbed. So, and the solitary realizes.
Yeah.
Contemplating disturbed.
Well, they have come to eliminate that from their minds, the disturbed energy from their minds. Simply that their goal isn't to help others how to do that, although, Theravadins teach and, sort of by default they are. However, their focus isn't enlightenment, because they have a, because their goal is self-liberation, nirvana, which we say perfect peace because it has overcome all the disturbed states of mind. So that's a pretty profound level, in which case you're not, again, also disturbed. The things that are around you are disturbing, but you're not disturbed by that. So you have a mind of equanimity towards that. So you can be much more effective because you're not disturbed. You have great clarity and insight. A few years ago when I was in Sydney, there was an Austrian woman who came to give talks. Her Lama had said to come and give talks, and then he had indicated for her to lead people during retreat in New Zealand. I don't think that bit happened. However, she'd met her Lama, which she was European. What did I say? Austrian, yeah. She'd met her Lama in teachings in Europe, and he said, come and visit me in Nepal. And so she went to Nepal. He'd given her an address. She got to Bodhanath Stupa and was asking people this street. And they said, we don't really name the streets. But eventually somebody said, well, why don't you go down there? And she went down that street, and he was in the window and called her up She spent the next 3 years training with him doing preliminaries. And then she went up in really harsh conditions in the mountains. And for the next 20 years, she was in retreat. Really, really austere conditions. So when she came to Sydney, somebody asked, so, from being in retreat to being here, what's the difference, what it's like? And she said, it's the same. So her experience was the same. Being in Sydney, being in isolation, solitude in the mountains, her experience was the same. Altruism, no, on top of that, altruism is the mind that says, I'm going to guide all other sentient beings to achieve Buddhahood, Right. So, or at least this ultimate altruism is that. I mean, the mind of altruism is something that we naturally have, the wish to be of benefit to others. So it's saying, okay, we're going to expand that. We're going to expand that more and more until it encompasses all living beings and take on the responsibility of guiding them to enlightenment. So that's that's on top. So the mind that, of those Arya beings is a very powerful mind. And if you then on top develop bodhicitta, the power of that mind of understanding reality as it is, the wisdom realizing emptiness, understanding reality as it is, the power of that mind, empowers your bodhicitta mind. But you can also say, if you start with the bodhicitta mind as a Mahayana practitioners, and then that can help enhance and empower your development of wisdom. So they can go together to enhance each other. Okay, like the sun. Similarly, there's no need to mention the extent to which the instructions for training in the awakening mind, described below, eliminate the darkness of the mind. So I always think with the darkness of the mind, it always reminds me about the first female astronomer to be appointed in Australia. And her area was deep space and black holes and everything dark in the universe. And she said, what we know about the universe is about 17%. I'm not quite sure how she calculated that, but about 17%. She said the rest is the darkness of human ignorance. And she's sounding like a Buddhist. The darkness of human ignorance. Right, so we're wanting to eliminate that darkness of human ignorance. By knowing just one part of this teaching, you can eliminate the self-centered attitude induced by the ignorance of misconceiving the self. So this is where interesting, if you come back to your question, because if you have eliminated the ignorance of misconceiving the self, then you're no longer self-centered. Right. However, if you reach that state from a Theravada presentation, that's it. You've reached nirvana, perfect peace. Of course, it's said that at some time later, a Buddha comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, enough bliss and peace already, get up the path to Buddhahood. I don't know. That's how we say it, right? The ignorance of misconceiving the self and the darkness of the primary and secondary disturbing emotions. So we talk about the three root primary: ignorance, greed or attachment, desire, and hatred, anger, aversion. Those three main minds that then propel, we talk about, just in summary, the secondary disturbing emotions being 20, but believe me, there's many more than that. But they're just so that we can define and understand and be able to work on eliminating those in our mind. And then as like a medicinal tree, so we have medicine Buddha with the aurora, holding an aurora branch. So aurora is a very, sort of powerful very powerful medicinal herb. And as it says here, in the case of a medicinal plant which has the power to cure the 424 diseases. So in the Guru Puja, it mentions the 424 affliction-caused diseases, implying that not all diseases are affliction-caused. So we could debate. So 424, sometimes there's 404, 424, and then we get on to the 84,000 afflictions. But affliction-caused diseases, right? So even its parts such as roots, fruits, leaves, flowers, and branches also have such power. So incredibly powerful plant. I was, again, on this pilgrimage, I went to Mense Kang in Dharamsala. Actually went to Mense Kang in Delhi as well, and saw the Tibetan doctor who told me that I wouldn't have a problem with the altitude up in Ladakh. That's what was my major concern. However, he still gave me all the pills to take, and the big fat ones. And then said, when you get there, get some sampa, the roasted barley, and have a drink every morning before breakfast, half an hour before breakfast, of sampa and Indus River water. So fortunately, we were up near the source of the Indus River. I thought, oh, well, I'll do what he said and hope that I'm fine. No problem. All good. So, but we went to Mense Khan in Dharamsala and actually got to go. So that's the Tibetan medicine and astrology sort of center. We got to go into the factory area, which is very rare, where you got to see them, how the process of compiling the medicines. So that was really very fascinating. But we weren't allowed to take any photos anywhere, including in the museum or anywhere. So that was like throughout much of our trip. But, when those doctors train, I remember Dr. Thubten, who's one of the His Holiness Tibetan doctors, and he came to Australia about a decade ago. And he was giving a presentation and showing that when you train, you have to not only be able to identify the different herbs, but identify them in powdered form. And it just looks like the same colour heaps, just like it's all the same to me. But they have to be able to identify each one because they're using, everything ends up in powdered form. So they said for that reason we don't take anyone over 25, because after that your intelligence is not as sharp. Bit depressing to hear that, isn't it? Okay. Like a medicinal tree. Similarly, there is no need to mention how, if you understand the teachings on mind training, they will uproot the chronic disease of the 84,000 disturbing emotions, because understanding but one part of this teaching will serve as the most perfect remedy for all ailments. In other words, you don't need to go through every single one by one. That this teaching gives you the power to be able to eliminate, to have the remedy for the disturbing states of mind, which is all based on self-cherishing. So if you eliminate that, you eliminate those disturbing states of mind. Okay, so that's the first 2 lines. The next 2 lines, this time of the 5 degenerations will then be transformed into the path to the fully awakened state. So we're talking about this time right now. Now you've got to think that Geshe Chökyi was talking about this state of 5 degenerations 1,000 years ago. So even though, we might in our memory think, oh, but that was the golden age, we're already here talking about a time of degeneration, let alone what we see today, much more understandable. So this time of the 5 degenerations that occur as human beings evolve over the eon of existence. So in recent years, it's talked more and more that we're coming to the end of this eon. So the eon in which we've encountered the Buddha's teachings, and the eon in which the Buddha taught, and so forth. But also as we're seeing degeneration. So we're seeing this with climate change. We're seeing this with, sort of many of the impacts of that in terms of, what did I read this morning in South America, was it? It can't be South America, wherever it was. They said middle of winter, 37 degrees. Right. That's the first time ever. So we've definitely got global warming going on. Just ask the farmers in WA, they'll all tell you we've definitely got that going on. So as the eon comes towards its end, these degenerations increase more and more. So the degeneration of disturbing thoughts and afflictions. So we look at the Buddha's time when so many beings, encountered the Buddha's teachings and became enlightened or had a direct realization of emptiness that were just ready. And there were a lot of spiritual seekers around and so forth. And you say, yeah, of course there are still spiritual seekers around. There's still beings who are enlightened. However, in general, we just have to look at social media, prefer not to mostly, to see the degeneration of disturbing thoughts, because people will post and then maybe think about it. And this is where we get, sort of politicians or people who have high profiles having to regret and, sort of try and undo what they've posted thoughtlessly, because it's just like coming. And I always find it fascinating when people say, oh, I didn't mean to say that. Well, if it wasn't in your mind, there's no way you could say it, right? If it's not there in the first place. So it's in your mind. It can be a sad reflection. So increasing afflicted states of mind, anger, road rage. Thankfully in Australia we had the, sort of guns buyback or back, so that, you see like in the States that people shoot each other just over at the petrol pump. Like, you jumped in front of me or something. Really? So we have very disturbing, more increasing disturbing afflictions. Degeneration of lifespan is something that I find very hard to think is happening right now. I think there's starting to be predictions of that. So what we've seen is an increase of lifespan, haven't we? That people living longer, and more people living longer, and as our baby boomers age, more people living longer. However, it's said that the human lifespan will go down to 10 years of age. And whether that's going to happen gradually or suddenly, because, just think when COVID started and the focus was on the elderly, the focus was on people over a certain age, and then young people started getting COVID, and younger people started getting COVID and so forth. So we never know what other diseases might occur that might end up in that situation. So, I remember a couple of years ago, His Holiness talking about this world coming to an end in about 30 years. And of course, you're all panicked because it's like, that's in my lifetime. And then he must have talked to some scientists who suggested it was, a few centuries away, and then you relax. But it's probably much longer than that. It seems to the indications are, sort of much longer than that, but we're in the downward spiral, shall we say. Degeneration of the time. So this is like, sort of the general degenerate, times that we live in, that which relates to the next one in terms of the view, where even when Lama Yeshe first started ordaining monks and nuns, we have this top is called a donka, and so he gave them the donkas that have yellow here. You might have seen Geshe Zopa wearing yellow here. So that generally denotes somebody who's finished a Geshe degree. One time because Lama was doing that, one time His Holiness the Dalai Lama looked around in a teaching and said, "Oh, there's many Geshis here." Of course they weren't. Why Lama Yeshe did that, he said it's so hard for Westerners to maintain the vows in this time, right? Because the times are so degenerate and that there's too many distractions, and it's a difficult time to maintain the vows. So he did that. You'll notice that we've all reverted now to this. Of course, we know in India, if we're ever in India, we're going to. But I remember it was one of the first donkas I was given had the yellow, and so I would wear that because I was given it. But these days, you'll find we don't. So we don't want to be mistaken for Geshis. Yeah. And degeneration of views. So here we can see in terms of what predominant views are in society. It's very much a sense of scientific materialism, economic materialism. And so the role of spiritual traditions is going down. You'll hear that across the board from all religions and so forth, that, less and less people. In fact, was it the last census or the one before, where most young people say they don't follow a religion, but they do have a sense of spirituality. So, of course, we all have a sense of spirituality, but maybe it's not until a crisis happens in our life that we think, oh gosh, I need to get some deeper meaning happening. So this is happening more and more degenerate views, more relating to the times, more just thinking of degenerate views, and Putin comes to mind. So more war, more conflicts in the world, environmental degradation, all of this is happening.
Yeah. And I'm not disagreeing, but I'm just thinking like the aspect of this in tradition.
Yes.
And it was that in me. But in terms of so if I was in the dark ages.
Yeah. Yes.
Greek civilization roots is about.
Yes.
In the midst. So how does that fit into?
Well, it's the same.
Yeah.
We'll fizzle out.
Yeah. So at any point.
Any point we'll fizzle out. Yes. Absolutely. The end of that particular. It was interesting again on that point that His Holiness the Dalai Lama. This was when was it? 2012 was the Gaia prophecy, wasn't it? The Mayan prophecy. That's right. The Mayan. I was like, no, it's wrong. Mayan prophecy. And His Holiness was asked about that. It was around about that time he was teaching in Tasmania, and was asked, what do we do? Why, will the world come to an end then, and so forth. And actually what he explained was, from a Mayan point of view, yes, because the Mayan people didn't, they were fairly independent and didn't trade with others and so forth. So they weren't sort of globally engaged or more broadly, and so that a society then fizzles out because it sort of like implodes. So that was the way that he explained that prophecy. So here we are, we're still alive. but it is, of course, when we come to an end of a great eon, then yeah, there's great shifts, huge shifts. His Holiness has said, well, if our time's up, meantime, cultivate this mind of bodhicitta, become an enlightened being, live in the Pure Land when that happens, so that you'll be able to see it from the Pure Land. He's not talking about from a lack of compassion, but if you're in a Pure Land, you have much more power to do something. And so, of course, how many lifetimes that is. So he's basically saying, train now. I mean, Lama Zopa Rinpoche said that for many years recently. I remember going, in Bendigo going, get it. Like urgency, sense of urgency that it's up to us as Westerners to have realizations. Because just look, I mean, Lama Zopa Rinpoche has recently passed. All these Tibetan Lamas are passing. He said you can't rely on that continuing because times have changed. And so Buddhism has been, quite established for 60 years in the West. It seems it's not a big amount of time, but it's a reasonable amount of time. And saying it's really like it's established in the West. I don't even know we say West anymore, throughout the world. And so it's really up to practitioners of now to be those leaders in the future, to be those great scholars and gurus and so forth, to have the realizations, because the world needs it, desperately needs it. And degeneration of sentient beings in terms of health. So, more physical illnesses, more mental illnesses. We certainly see that, don't we? We see more mental illnesses people diagnosed at a younger age. More physical illnesses. Who heard of COVID before a few years ago, and now they're sort of saying, and there'll be more pandemics, particularly related to global warming as the poles, melt, and different, what are they, microbes, aren't they? Anyway, bacteria are released. I just saw yesterday in the news, actually, it was it Indonesia? They're wanting to ban the selling of bats at their wet markets because they're concerned about, what sort of, case scenario is going to come out of that, because they're a delicacy in Indonesia. So we see this more and more diseases coming about. That's sort of fairly evident. Oh. Okay, so we'll just finish off on this one point, and then I just realised the time. So a little practice at this time when the 5 degenerations arise, and we are overwhelmed by both internal and external impediments, the internal being the afflictions, the physical illness, mental illness, and the outside environmental situation, will be more swiftly effective than accumulating merits for eons in a Pure Land. Now, having said go to the Pure Land, well, he's always said that. But it means that whatever practice that we do, even a little bit, is so much more powerful because we're up against so many obstacles. Such is a special method for transforming bad times into good ones, an explanation of which follows below. So that's when we go on to the rest of the actual training. So that's sort of the preliminaries finished. Yeah. So let's go about transforming bad times into good. Or as Lama Zopa Rinpoche often would say, learn to love your problems like you love ice cream. Turning it into an opportunity. I remember, was it 2006, that was the last time Lama Zopa was here, wasn't it? 2006. And there was, someone gave I know I've got a photo of it, ice cream with a cockroach on top. Does anyone remember that? photo of the ice cream. It wasn't a real cockroach. It was a fake cockroach. Who would make a fake cockroach? Yeah. My problem's on top of my ice cream. Anyway, so transform difficulties into opportunities is what it's saying. Okay, so we'll leave it there for today. Thank you. Is there any final comments or questions? Okay. If not, dedicate. So it's on page 17, the third verse down. Yewadi nyududa lama sange tripune troa chika malupaha de salago pato chanchu sencho rinpoche make panange kuchi ke panyampa me payan gomne gomdu pelwa shu. And page 19, the long life prayer, please follow Mr. Dalai Lama. We can say in English. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then page 23, a long life prayer for Tenzin Oso. Lord of Dharma, who in accordance with the various dispositions of those to be subdued, makes clear in the light of your well-spoken advice the sacred Ganden tradition, essence of Buddhist teachings. O foremost and holy Lama, to you are supreme. O Lama, please, please live long. And now the prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche is being circulated. No. Oh, actually, I've got it online, but to page 5. Fearless teacher, an assembly of children of the victorious one, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with your lineage, all their objects of refuge of their infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the victorious one's teachings and mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of the mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you very much. If anyone would like to stick around and have a cuppa in the chat, or please do.